I mean, the hypocrisy of folks in my party that spent years chanting "lock her up" about Hillary Clinton because of some deleted emails or quote unquote wiping a server are now out there defending a man who very clearly did not take the national security of the United States to heart, and it'll be up to DOJ whether or not that reaches the level of indictment. But this is disgusting in my mind.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger no longer hiding his disgust with members of his own party for their flagrant hypocrisy in defending Donald Trump for imperiling U.S. national security by hoarding classified documents. One of Trump's big defenders, someone he can always count on, Senator Lindsey Graham, he is himself under investigation, says that if DOJ does its job and follows the facts, and those facts prove that Trump committed a crime, well, it'll lead to violence. Watch.
Most Republicans, including me, believes when it comes to Trump, there is no law. It's all about getting him. If they try to prosecute President Trump for mishandling classified information after Hillary Clinton set up a server in her basement, they literally will be riots in the street. I worry about our country.
I think the guy on the left literally led the Benghazi hearings, but, you know. Joining us now, former Republican Congressman, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly's here. Also joining us, Rick Wilson, former Republican strategist, the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Claire is still with us. You know, Rick, I'm so happy to have Adam Kinzinger, you know, in the fight, slugging away at hypocrisy and flagrant debasing of U.S. national security norms. But this warning of violence is not a prediction. They're not interested in news. It's a threat.
That's exactly right. And, you know, it's easy to laugh off the singularity of strangeness of Trey Gowdy and Adam Kinzinger and Lindsey Graham on the screen at the same time. But that is a threat to America. They're not just joking about it. They're promising something. Lindsey Graham is basically now an accessory to this idea that if the law is applied to Donald Trump, there will be violence. This is not how a democracy works. This is not how a republic works. This is how a third world dictatorship works. This is Saddam Hussein, not Ronald Reagan. This is a dangerous precedent, and they're saying the quiet part out loud, Nicole. They are making the threat overt. They're making it direct, and they're promising that if we go forward as a country to enforce the law, we're going to have to do it through blood.
David Jolly, it's just Lindsey Graham sounding like sounding unserious and unprofessional and unpatriotic. But it's not just that. It's listening to Stephen Ayers, who testified as part of the January 6th Select Committee's public hearings, that he heard Trump's closest allies in Congress who agreed with Trump, who said, give him time. Maybe there's something there. Refused to call Joe Biden the president who won in a free and fair election that was the most secure in our country's history, which is what lifelong Republican Chris Krebs found. Their words have very real consequences. They include violence, and they just happened. What are they doing?
Nicole, there's a willingness inside the Trump regime to use violence to achieve what they cannot achieve politically. That is the single narrative of January 6th, and it supports in Donald Trump a man who would burn down the republic for his own vanities, for his own arrogance. And in someone like Lindsey Graham, you have someone bringing the kerosene and the matches to the party simply so he can be part of the cool kids club. And he is a United States senator. The opportunity in that moment during a full discussion with Trey Gowdy is not to say, oh, it's inevitable there will be riots. It's to say that there should not be riots. It's to say that even if you have your differences with the decision that ultimately is made by the Department of Justice, the way to exercise that is through your franchise, and to exercise that at the ballot box, and to call for calm and to call for order. That's not Lindsey Graham. That's not Donald Trump, and that's not today's Republican Party. It's an indictment, but it's also a warning. It's a warning that this is a regime that must be stopped.
And one of the most effective messengers who are not for long, but still in Congress is Adam Kinzinger, who basically made that point, Claire. Let me show this to you.
The bottom line is the biggest threat right now to our country is democracy. And if you have Republicans that are running against even left-wing Democrats that believe in democracy and believe in voting, that person should be elected over somebody who basically would overthrow the will of the people and ultimately destroy this country. This country cannot survive outside of democracy. It'll turn into a power struggle between groups of different races, of different ethnicities, of different religions, because the thing that holds us together is this belief that we can self-govern. Take that away, this country's a mess. And so Republicans that are for that have no place in office. I don't care what their policy position on taxes are.
So, Claire, this didn't get as much attention as I think it deserved. He says, if you have Republicans running against even left-wing Democrats that believe in democracy and believe in voting, that's every Democrat, that person should be elected over somebody who basically would overthrow the will of the people and ultimately destroy the country. That's many Republicans. This sort of message about democracy has hit a nerve with voters, as has overturning Roe versus Wade. What are you feeling sort of among voters out in the country?
Well, I think I'm right now in the part of my state where Trump is very, very popular. And it is a real head scratcher for me. And the thing that's the saddest about this is I don't know exactly what Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, what in their background separated them from the crowd. And there's a few others. Mitt Romney's had his moments. There were others that did the right thing in terms of certifying the election, but not many. And the power they have is immense. And behind the scenes right now, Mitch McConnell is trying to use that power. He's not happy what Lindsey Graham is doing. He's not happy with all these election deniers carrying the mantle of the Republican Party into November. He wants Trump to be in the rearview mirror, and Trump will not let that happen. And so others need to publicly do what Adam Kinzinger has done. They need to stand up to Lindsey Graham. And by the way, let me just say this about Lindsey Graham. He called former President Trump a kook when he was running. Lindsey Graham has kind of turned into a kook now. He's a kook because he's a lawyer. He's a former military prosecutor. He knows the difference between Hillary Clinton's case and this case. He knows they're factually different. He knows every prosecutor has to look at the facts and apply the law. So he knows better. So that means he is somebody who is embracing violence over the rule of law. That makes him a kook.